Good day everyone, my name is Jenny Badia. I am the second reporter of Chapter 10, The Birth of National Consciousness. So first, we tackle about the secularization controversy. So the Catholic Church in the Philippines had regular and secular priests. So regular priests were from religious orders aimed at spreading Christianity, e.g. Franciscans, Dominicans, and Augustinians. So secular priests were trained to run parishes under bishops' supervision. So conflict arose when bishop attempted to visit parishes run by regular priests. Regular priests denied bishops jurisdictions and threatened to leave their parishes. So in 1774, Archbishop Basilio Santa Hosta upheld Union's authority and appointed secular priests to replace regulars. So the secularization controversy in the Philippines involved a conflict within the Catholic Church. So regular priests belong to religious orders, focused on spreading Christianity, while secular priests were trained under bishop supervision to manage parishes. So conflict arose when bishop tried to oversee parishes run by regular priests, who challenged the bishop authority. So the regular priest refused to accept the bishop or jurisdictions and threatened to abandon their parishes. So this dispute highlighted the power struggle between religious orders and Union's authorities. So Archbishop Basilio Santa Rosa intervened in 1774. He sided with the diocesan authority. So ultimately replacing regular priests with secular ones, this action solidified the bishop control over the parishes. So the controversy reflects a broader struggle for control and authority within the church. So the event significantly altered the structure and governance of the Catholic Church in the So there was a shortage of secular priests, leading to expedited ordination of Filipino seculars. So a royal decree was issued on November 9, 1774 for the secularizations of parishes. So regular presented the secularization, deeming Filipino unfit for the priesthood based on race and experience. So the return of Jesuits intensified tensions, highlighting favoritism towards Spanish regular priests. So Monsignor Pedro Pilaes supported the Filipino priest but died in earthquake in 1863. So after his death, other priests including Father Mariano Gomez, Jose Burgos, and Jacinto Zamora continued to support the movement. So a shortage of secular priests in the Philippines led to the rapid ordination of Filipino priests. So a royal decree in 1774 mandated the secularization of parishes, transferring control from religious orders to diocesan authorities. So regular or religious order priests strongly opposed this, arguing Filipino lacked the necessary qualifications for the priesthood. So their resentment stemmed from racial bias and perceived lack of experience among Filipino candidates. So the return of Jesuits further intensified the conflict as it seemed to favor Spanish priests. So Monsignor Pedro Pilaes key supporter of Filipino priest, died in earthquake in 1863. So despite his death, other priests, including Mariano Gomez, Jose Burgos, and Jacinto Zamora, continued the fight for Filipino rights within the church. So their advocacy became a significant factor in the growing nationalist sentiment in the Philippines. So this movement eventually contributed to broader social and political changes in the country. So the events highlights the complex interplay of religious, racial, and political tensions in 18th and 19th century. So next, the Cavite Mutiny. So the Cavite Mutiny occurred on January 20, 1871 at Fort San Felipe in Cavite, Philippines. About 1,000 colonial troops and liberals believed the uprising would lead to a national rebellion. So the mutiny failed, resulting in many participants executed and suppressions of the nationalist movement. Schools view this movement as the start of Filipino nationalism that contributed to the Philippines revolutions. So the Cavite Mutiny took place on January 20, 1871 at Fort San Felipe in Cavite, Philippines. Approximately 1,000 colonial troops liberals participated, hoping to spark a wider national rebellion against Spanish rule. So the mutiny primary causes was the removal of certain privileges and pay increases for laborers. So the uprising was swiftly suppressed by Spanish forces. Many participants were executed, leading significant casualties. So the failed mutiny resulted in the harsh suppression of the nationalist movement. Historians consider growth of Filipino nationalism. So it's seen as the precursor to the Philippines Revolution. So the event is growing discontent among Filipino under the Spanish colonial rule. So the mutiny failure, however, did not extinguish the flames of evolution. So, causes of mutiny. So, the main causes was an order from Governor General Rafael D. Esquerdo imposing personal taxation on military soldiers. So, soldiers were previously exempted from the taxes, which involved monetary payments and forced labor called polo e servicio. So, the mutiny sparked after laborers noticed deduction from their pay for these taxes on January 20. So, the Cavite Mutiny primary cause was the Gobernador General Rafael D. Esquerdo. So, order exposing personal taxes on military soldiers. The soldiers had previously been exempted from taxes. So, the taxes included monetary payments and forced labor known as polo y servicio. So this imposition of these new taxes was a significant grievance among the soldiers. So laborers also notice deduction from their pay for the same taxes. So this sparks outrage and resentment among those affected. The combination of financial burden and forced labor fueled discontent. So this resentment over the new tax policy was a major trigger for the mutiny. So the lack of prior consultations and the perceived unfairness of the taxes further inflame the situation. So this ultimately led to the soldiers and laborers' collective actions on January 20. Next, we move on leadership and event. So the mutiny was led by Fernando Lamadrid and his second in command, General Bren Pedro. So they captured Fort San Felipe and killed 11 Spanish officers. The mutineers hoped other Filipino soldiers in Manila would join, but a celebration was mistaken for a signal. So Spanish authorities retreated quickly, besieging the fort until the mutineers surrendered, followed by the execution. So the Cavite mutiny was led by Fernando Lamadrid and his second in command, General Bren Fernando. They successfully captured Fort San Felipe. 11 Spanish officers were killed during the initial takeover. So the mutineers hoped to rally support from other Filipino soldiers in Manila. As a celebratory event was mistakenly interpreted as a signal for a wider uprising. So Spanish authorities responded swiftly by besieging the fort. The siege led to the mutineers' eventual surrender. So the following surrender executions were carried out. The mutiny failure underscored the disparity and military strength. The event remains a significant chapter in the history. So aftermath. So some Filipino soldiers were disarmed and exiled to Mindanao. Others were arrested and executed. The mutiny implicated 3 priests Gomborza who were executed on February 17, 1872. So Governor General Esquerdo approved death sentence for 41 mutineers with the exile to the other island. Affected Filipinos formed expatriate communities in Europe, pushing for the Philippines Revolution. A decree restricted ordinations of Filipino parishes priests. So Spanish authorities continued using Filipino troops until 1898. So the aftermath of the Cavite Mutiny involved severe reprisals against Filipino participants. So some soldiers were disarmed and exiled to Mindanao, while others faced arrest and execution. So the mutiny implicated 3 priests like Gomborza who were executed on February 17, 1872. So Governor General Esquerdo approved death sentence for exiled to 41 mutineers, with some exiled to other islands. So the harsh treating fueled further resentment among Filipinos. Affected Filipinos formed communities in Europe, actively advocating for the Filipino Revolution. So a decree restricted ordination of Filipino parish priests, limiting their advancement with the church. So despite that, the crackdown, Spanish authorities continued to utilize Filipino troops until 1898. So the events of the mutiny and its aftermath significantly impacted the course of Philippine history. So the harsh responses only intensified the desire for independence. So next, the trial. So the captured mutineers testified against Jose Burgos. State witness Francesco Saldua reported a support plot involving the Basa brothers. So Father Burgos was accused of conspiring with Ramon Morente. Friar orders decided to implicate Burgos in Mutiny plot. A Franciscan friar disguised as Burgos suggested mutiny to the mutiners. Senior friars convinced Governor General Rafael de Izquierdo of Burgos' involvement, and Gomez and Zamora, associate of Burgos, were also accused. So the trial of the following Cavite mutiny so captured mutiners testify against Jose Burgos. So this statement witness Francisco Saldua implicated the Basa brothers in a supposed larger conspiracy. So Father Burgos faced accusations of conspiring with Ramon Morente, and friar orders actively sought to implicate Burgos in a wider mutiny plot. So a Franciscan friar disguised as Burgos was alleged to have encouraged the mutiny, and senior friar successfully convinced Governor General Rafael de Izquierdo of Burgos' involvement. So this influence heavily swayed the outcomes of Burgos were also implicated and accused. So the trial lacked due process of fairness. So serving as a political maneuver, the proceedings were largely seen as a show trial designed to ultimate dissent. So next, the execution of Father Gomez, Burgos, and Zamora. So in 1872, soldier was worked mutinied against forced labor and tributes, and Governor General Izquierdo used the mutiny to target leaders of the secularization movement. So on February 17, 1872, the three priests were executed publicly, and their execution sparked national consciousness among Filipinos. So the slogan "Remember Gomburza" became rallying cry for unity. So Jose Rizal dedicated his novel El Filibusterismo to their memory. So in 1872, Filipino soldiers and workers mutinied against forced labor and tributes. So Governor General Izquierdo used these mutinies as a pretext to target leaders of the secularization movements. So the three priests, Gomez, Burgos, Zamora, or Gomburza, were publicly executed on February 17, 1872. So their executions galvanized Filipino nationalism and fueled anti-Spanish sentiment. So the event became a symbol of oppressions and justice. The slogan cry for unity among Filipinos, the execution are considered a pivotal moment in the development of the Filipino identity. So Jose Rizal, a prominent Filipino nationalist, dedicated his novel El Filibusterismo to their memory. So their death followed the growing calls from the reform and independence. The execution remained a powerful symbol in the Philippine history. So next is the propaganda movement. So the propaganda movement was a call for the response by native Filipinos. So it lasted from the approximately 1880 to 1886. So with most actively between 1880 and 1895. So the meaning of propaganda in English differs from its original Latin meaning. The original Latin context relates to the spread of faith and evangelization. So Filipino group sent Marcelo H. del Pilar to Spain for information, campaigns, and sympathy. So Dr. Domingo Abella suggested to be called the counter-propaganda movement. So the movement aims to counter misinformation spread by certain Spanish group. So the propaganda movement was a reform movement led by Filipino natives in the late 19th century. So it lasted from approximately on 1880 to 1886 with peak activity between 1880 and 1995. So the movement goal was to advocate for reforms within the Spanish colonial government. So the term propaganda has a different meaning in English compared to its original Latin meaning. It is a original Latin context. Propaganda referred to the spreading of faith and evangelization. So the Filipino leaders such as Marcelo H. del Pilar actively campaigned in Spain to garner support for their cause. So Dr. Domingo Abilia suggested an alternative name, counter-propaganda movement. It means reflecting its aim. The propaganda movement so to counteract misinformations spread by certain Spanish group. So it played a crucial role in raising awareness about the injustice faced by Filipino. The movement helped lay the groundwork for the Philippine Revolution. That's all my part. Thank you for listening. God bless.